But tonight we are so proud to be hosting the illustrious Susanna Moore for her memoir, Miss Aluminum. We were actually supposed to host Susanna in person back in April, but sadly we all know how that went. Thank you, first of all, Susanna, for giving us a second shot at hosting you, although it is very different. Hopefully tonight will be just as lovely as it would have been in April. And with Susanna tonight is Eva Vives. Eva is a Spanish screenwriter, director, and producer. She directed All About Nina in 2017 and also wrote the short film Join the Club, which premiered in 2016 at the Sundance Film Festival. She is the first woman writer director to have attended the Sundance Film Festival with a film, participated in the Sundance Screenwriters Lab, as well as the Directors Lab and the Skywalker Sound Lab all in 1 year. But tonight, Eva's grand responsibility is going to be interrogating our author, Susanna Moore. Susanna is the author of several novels. The most recent one was The Life of Objects, and she's also written 2 other works of nonfiction. I myself have seen it, and Paradise of the Pacific. But if you have read Miss Aluminum or have started it at all, you'll know that Susanna has had quite the life, from being a model to meeting Joan Didion and Audrey Hepburn to being a script reader for Jack Nicholson and Warren Beatty. I have a feeling we're going to be hearing a lot of really fabulous stories tonight, which I myself am very excited for. So without further ado, I'd like to give the proverbial Zoom stage to our 2 wonderful speakers, Eva and Susanna, if you would both take it away.
Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa. So, Susanna, it's nice to see you, even if it's in this bizarre way that we are all relating to one another now.
Good to see you. I'm happy to see you.
Me too. I wanted to ask you before we get into the book, just because, I mean, we emailed back and forth a little bit, but maybe you don't mind sharing how you have been spending COVID, and if you've had any revelations or thoughts or anything during this bizarre period.
I have a very a rare form of TB that I got in India years ago. So I am in isolation and really can't go out. So that has been strange, very lonely at times. But the irony, of course, is that it proves something that I've always suspected, which is that the human ones adapt themselves very quickly. And so I have come to rather prize it. And I was thinking just this morning that I'm now quite possessive of my loneliness and become a little resentful when it's interrupted. Someone is coming to see me tomorrow, the first person really to ever come here with masks and gloves, and it was very short, but I find myself thinking, oh, why did I do that? Why am I letting anybody come here? So I've perfected the possession of this space and this solitude.
Well, so that's not bad at all.
No, it's not bad. It's a little eccentric, but it's not bad.
Well, it's funny that you mentioned loneliness, because I felt that was one of the central feelings that I had in reading your book from the beginning, and one that definitely gave, it was very emotional that way, but that I also felt in your loneliness, certainly in terms of growing up fairly alone, missing your mother, but also in how alone you were when you were reading. That's something that's mentioned a lot in the book, and that does give you I share that with you, as I think that books or reading as a saving mechanism, really. But it's interesting to hear you talk about that now, because I wanted to ask you about that and how, it sounds like, do you feel like maybe you've not conquered that, but does it feel like a comfort again, or?
You mean reading a comfort, or isolation, or both?
Isolation. I guess you're saying you've kind of, in a way, mastered it. Did it feel lonely? Did it feel like a bad thing in your childhood or in your growing up? Or did that also give you a sense of self when you were younger?
I think it gave me a sense of self, and I think it was necessary to find a sense of self because I had a mother who was not well, and I was the oldest of all these children. So I had, much too much responsibility, but it was not a question of choice or desire. So I don't think I was very much physically alone, maybe emotionally alone.
Yeah. So I remember talking to you, I think the last time we saw each other in person was maybe 2015 in New York. And I remember you were telling me that you were thinking about possibly writing this memoir. And at the time you weren't altogether sure that you wanted to do it or not. So I thought I would ask you what made you decide to write it.
Part of it is writing. There's an aspect of writing that's very practical. And I ended up writing it in part because I could think of nothing else to write. I didn't have any ideas. I owed a novel and still owe a novel to my publisher, but I hadn't a thought in my head. And I had been urged for a number of years by friends who knew that I had spent these 10 years in Los Angeles in that quite seminal period of the late 60s and 70s, and had encouraged me to write about it. And so I thought, well, if I limited it to those 10 years, it might be something I could do. And I've been asked subsequently by my publisher, my editor, to write the next 10 years.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to. This is enough.
Well, I am, jumping to the end, but it was one of the things that I as I was reading it, obviously, and getting towards the end, I kept thinking, oh, she's not going to cover her whole life because, I could see kind of where we were at. And I was actually quite sad about that because I really wanted to know, I know you as a writer first, and then obviously as a mother. And it's a lot of what we've talked about, but I kept thinking, for me, as somebody who has identified as an artist first and then a woman and a mother, I really wanted to hear how you had done all of that and how you had, found your voice. But actually, when I got to the end, I thought it was one of the most poetic and actually really hopeful endings I'd read in a long time, which I know it might be, well, no, it's not a funny thing to say about the book, because I think the book is a very reaffirming book about certainly your life and your selfhood, however painful it becomes at times. But yeah, I guess maybe you've just answered that, but if you can talk a little bit about why you ended it in the moment that you did, I would love to hear about that decision.
Well, it seemed in the beginning when I started writing manageable, to limit it to those 10 years. And 10 years, which I had been told by friends was of interest to people. And while I was writing it, the Tarantino movie came out, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which is also of that same period. And in fact, in the film, the Sharon Tate character goes to see a Matt Helm movie, which was one of the series of films. I was in one of them. Yeah. And that made me think, oh, well, yes, perhaps people will be interested in this. I thought, in a funny way, I tried to remove myself as much as was possible. I know that sounds paradoxical, that I really tried to be objective while writing something very subjective. And I tried all the time to imagine that I was writing a novel, to make it less prosaic and less sort of what I would consider tiresome if it was too chronological. And I wanted very much, desperately, for it not to be a book about my triumph over adversity, or even how did this person become a writer. And of course, I don't even mention the books. I really kept it, and at times it was difficult to what I was doing and thinking then. So there's very little foreshadowing. There's very little reference there's no reference to the future.
No, I think that's one of the many strengths about it is how shockingly realistic it is in many ways. I mean, it's certainly, you know, I think for a book where I think a lot of people would think, oh, you know, you're a model in the 60s and the 70s, and we all immediately have a certain idea of what that might be or convey or look like. And I think it really does an incredible job of sort of, you know, ending that fantasy in a way that is very realistic, and that to me felt much more truthful than so many of the other depictions we've seen, including, by the way, the Tarantino movie, you know, in many ways. But yeah, I mean, I think there is something quite shocking actually about how objective, if it's to use your word, it is. And I know that you have an aversion to, you know, I mean, obviously correct me if I'm wrong, but to the sort of current mood of going out there and, you know, revealing every little thing that has happened to people that, yeah, I don't know, that might have had any effect on their lives. So I wondered how, you know, I knew some of the stuff that you talk about, but it was nevertheless, I think, very affecting in terms of how you describe it. I mean, again, I think because it made you think about what it must have been like for you, not knowing where you were going to end up, right?
Yes. Still not knowing. I still don't know. But one of the things in your brilliant movie, All About Nina, is the means to which we resort to overcome and ideally to expiate the grief and anger occasioned by childhood trauma. Mm-hmm. And that's very much a theme of the book too.
Yes, not wanting to be a victim. Yeah.
How do we get through this? That was a question always. And you know, I did not want to write about my childhood again. I thought I had certainly written about it a lot. And the first 3 novels are very autobiographical.
Sure.
My Own Sweetheart, many of the things that I write about in the memoir have been written about, fictionalized in My Own Sweetheart, which is about my mother and me as a child. So I thought, not because I didn't think about whether a reader might be interested. I just was not interested. I had done it enough.
Yeah.
But as I was writing, I realized that I couldn't exclude it because so many of the choices I made as a young woman were so inexplicable, so self-destructive, so erratic, so impulsive, so passive, so many things that I needed to give some sense of my childhood in order to amplify why I made those choices. Otherwise, I think I just would have seemed irresponsible. And
what do you mean? Like what kind? What's an example of one of those choices?
Well, you know, certainly some of the men that I was with, or the instances of infidelity, the identifying in a strange way with my father often rather than my mother. My mother who was a victim, my father who was not, ostensibly not. And the grief, even the grief that I felt, primarily that the depression and the grief and the melancholy would not have made sense if you did not know that what had happened to me as a child.
But how much, I'm curious, like when you're talking about, obviously it was your choice to say marry your first husband, but I'm also curious, one of the things that I think, again, the book does so well is show us how little choice in a way women had in those times. Now, I know you could argue you didn't have to marry the guy, but I think you have a great line about saying something about how, you know, divorce was unthinkable simply because you'd made the choice to marry the wrong guy. Like you knew fairly early on that you shouldn't have married him. But, you know, our world, I mean, I can say certainly my mother, my grandmother, so many women that I know that are in my life and friends had that realization also fairly on in marriages, but they were also so often told as women that they needed to get married. And in fact, so many of them did in order to get out of a terrible situation, for example, at home, right? Or just to get their life started. So again, I don't, as you know, I'm also averse to, you know, positioning myself as a victim of any kind. And I don't want to generalize that for women either. But it's also undeniable that, you know, we were told to stick to this. And for so many of us, oh, somebody, okay.
And not only that, not only was it, you know, mildly disgraceful, but then what? What were you to do when you leave? We were, you know, I had not been to college. I had no training. I had no money. I had no family really. No home to go to. That was always a question. You know, now, so I leave. Now what?
And in fact, when you asked your aunts for help after that marriage went south, I mean, I don't want to give anything away either. I don't know. They offered no help.
No, and also with women, to go back to the generalizations, imagine having to make that choice once you have children.
Right.
You know, almost impossible.
So. Right, which then often also kept women in unhappy relationships. Yeah. Okay. So let me see. I mean, there's so many things in the book that I love, and I've told you that. I also think one of the things that obviously you've done in many of your novels before and continue to do here is talk about these still kind of taboo topics for women. One of which in this, I thought, and you don't, of course, say it directly, but I thought was the price of that women often pay for being beautiful. I thought that was really palpable in the book, even for somebody like you who didn't necessarily want to be a model or pursue that, but was, you know, certainly seen as having an advantage over others because of your physical beauty, but then discounted in pretty much every other way, including as an artist, right? I wondered if that was something that you, I mean, the other thing that I thought was tied to that was this idea that sex was not something that women knew really anything about at the time, or had the power to investigate as a source of pleasure. And I know that's something you talk about a lot about in the book, and I found fascinating. Was that something that you were conscious of at the time or more later?
You know, it's so interesting because I really was very naive. Partly because I didn't have an older sister. I didn't have to tell me things. I didn't have the experience of girlfriends in college who would talk about these things, you know, in a dorm room. I didn't have a mother. My aunts were away. And also I had this really rather provincial Catholic childhood, which was very repressive and guilt-inducing. So I really was taught that sex was bad, and that girls who had sex before marriage were whores. I remember we used to use that word in school. Oh, is she a whore? Which meant that she had a healthy sex life.
Right.
But what was interesting too is that I have a daughter, as you know, and when she was little, I was always finding ways to encourage her and her friends to be comfortable with their bodies. We would during the summer, if we were by the sea, I would, get them to swim naked with me in the evening, or not to be ashamed, to be able to talk about things. And one day, when she was about 12, she came to me and said, "Mother, can we get through one day without using the word vagina?" And I thought, well, I lost her. I knew at a certain point the world was going to win and take over. I was hoping it wouldn't come that soon. It made me realize, of course, that the mores and the restrictions and the prejudices and the shame, is endemic. And even in the next generation, which my daughter was, there was no getting away from the shame and the confusion, and even though she knew much more about sex by the time she was 18 than I knew, there still was, it was still very complicated for her and for her friends.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's ever, or well, I don't know, maybe at some point a simple thing, but I mean, for me, I've sort of feel like I've honed it down to women being able to find their source of pleasure and be okay with that, as opposed to just like take what is given to them or what is told that they have to do, right? I think that's part of the complication as well. I mean, it's funny that, again, this idea that like older women know what they want sexually, it's like, well, yeah, because it takes a while, right? I mean, one isn't necessarily, I mean, some people I feel like are born knowing exactly what their kink is or their.
They are, and I do envy them.
Do you think your mother would have been more open with you about not just sexuality, but relationships had she been alive as you grew up, or no?
I would like to think that she would have been, but I'm not sure. I've often felt that as difficult as her death was for me and how long lasting the grief has been, it also freed me to become this, I suppose, bohemian, homeless wanderer that I was for so many years and still am to some degree, because she would have wanted for me a much more conventional life. A prosperous husband, children, station wagon, nice house. She would have, good silver, all of those things that I never really had and never really wanted.
You think she would have pushed you in that direction?
Oh, I absolutely would have wanted that for me, especially because she had been pushed in that direction by her own mother, and because she had not had it as a child. She held all of those things quite dear, social status, comfort,
Do you think
it would have been important to her that I be secure in that way?
Right. Do you think, I mean, I felt both her presence and her absence in the book so strongly, but also I don't think I had realized just from talking to you how much she read. And is that something that you feel you learned from her or inherited, or at least were taught by her? Or do you think you would have become a reader independently?
I think both. I think because I was such a bookworm, but of course, yes, I did learn from her. And the afternoons when we would go to the Honolulu bookstore were thrilling. I would be allowed to pick one or two books to take home. Of course, she influenced me. And also she encouraged it, as in the story I tell about writing the letter to the librarian saying that the books that I was borrowing were for her, when I knew, of course, that they were for me.
Yeah, it's such a great detail and story. Do you feel like, oh, I forgot. Sorry, I was going to ask a question and then I started thinking about that and I forgot. Oh, well. Oh, well. let me see, what else do I have here? I also, the title was really interesting to me, and I wondered if you could, I mean, I feel like it's so palpable in the book, that becomes clear as you read it, that it seems to be about this woman who's wearing like a cold shield of probably protection around it. But is that what you intended by it, or did you, why did you pick that?
One of the things I teach my students,
Yeah.
Is that metaphors cannot really be devised beforehand, that you often don't realize that you have made a metaphor until someone points it out to you, like a critic or a reader, or you realize it yourself that, that's a metaphor. And of course, the title is a metaphor
Right.
for it's not Miss Gold. It's not even,
Yeah.
not even Miss Silver. It's this sort of flimsy, thin, malleable, not very expensive metal.
Yeah.
And also it's an amalgam. It's not even pure aluminum. It's a mixture of a lot of metals. And so, yes, a metaphor. I didn't think of it at the time, I have to say, but.
Were there other titles that you were considering?
No,
No.
No, I no other titles. No.
Okay. So can we talk a little bit about you mentioned the years in LA and being here. Obviously, this is where I am as well. And, obviously some of the men, actually, I think most of the men that you mentioned in terms of Warren Beatty, Roman Polanski, Jack Nicholson, all of them are still around and here. Do you feel like, you were so much of their inner circle in a way. Do you see them differently now than you saw them back then? You do such a great job of, explaining what they felt like and what being around them was like, which I don't know. I was not surprised by some of the stories that you tell, but it sort of was good to confirm that certainly in terms of, again, none of them really seemed to be interested in what you had to say as a person or as an artist, and that you were just kind of there as far as they were concerned, right?
Yes, and I was very young. I mean, Jack would have been the exception because he did really enjoy and depend on the reports that I wrote,
Right.
and trusted me, and took my judgment. He never gainsaid that. Of course, I feel different. I feel differently about Roman, of course, given what he did after I knew him and was around him. I regret that I didn't quite show how intelligent and funny Warren is. I think my portrayal of him was a little bit unfair because he's a little better than that. He's very smart and it's funny.
I think he'll be fine. I think we know that, and I certainly have respect for him as an artist. Absolutely. I think it is important to show, and obviously, to show how comfortable men have been with really only seeing women as extensions of themselves, even if it is as, quote unquote, D girls, or, obviously, I think you're referring to the moment where in order to be hired, they ask you to lift your skirt up. As opposed to anything else. It feels shocking now, but also we know these things to be true, and they have been for a long time. But I think that one of the things that's been great about the last few years is how women have just had the chance to speak out on it, and really the kind of, how aggressive that feels when you're in that situation. Like, what were you supposed to do?
But at the time, it wasn't shocking. It was, I knew that it was funny in its way. And even he knew it was funny, because he's not dumb. He meant it. He did want to see what they looked like. But, I was wearing a mini skirt. He knew very well what my legs looked like. So,
right.
But there's one line in the book, which is very revelatory of that period, maybe even now, and what you are saying, which is that when I write that because Dean Martin didn't want to sleep with me, he trusted me,
Yeah.
which is absolutely what happened, and he did trust me. I was only 22 years old, and but he did
But are those,
rely
were
on
those,
me in certain
right.
instances, far beyond, my age would have enabled me to deal with, but also, he counted on my discretion because he was very, he Penny Brahms, who he would sleep with at my house, was, 16.
Mm. So,
Again,
yeah.
now I didn't realize that until years later. I thought she was, 18, but even so, it didn't.
Right.
It didn't.
But I guess that's my question, is because I know that things weren't being seen or judged the same way at the time that they are now. I guess that's my question is, do you, I know you can still see it the way you can explain, like, that's not how people were seeing things at the time, but has that changed your actual opinion of, say, like Dean Martin sleeping with a 16-year-old? Is that more problematic to you now than it was at the time? Or do you still feel like, well, it was what it was and things were different?
No, I'm very shocked by it.
Right.
And I said I did not know she was 16. I only really realized it when I was doing the research for the book. I was checking certain facts. Was she alive? And I saw the dates, and I was quite shocked by that.
You did the math.
Maybe he didn't know either. No, I feel quite differently about how about those things. Even in the novel, my novel In the Cut,
Yeah.
in which I am exploring the idea of how far a woman will go to take responsibility for herself, and how she keeps herself out of danger. I mean, I used to think, that this idea that if a woman went into a bar in a hot, in shorts,
Mm-hmm.
What did she expect? Something you would hear from judges and from lawyers and from men and from the press. Well, what did you think was going to happen? And this idea absolutely infuriated me, that men were not being held responsible for their aggression. And I changed how I felt about that after writing In the Cut, and maybe as my daughter grew up, I began to think that a woman does have responsibility up to a point, that it perhaps is wiser not to go into the motorcycle bar in shorts alone. But when I was younger, I would have been absolutely defiant about that.
Right.
And refused to succumb to anyone else's idea, a man's idea, a judge's idea of how I should behave.
Right. But as you say, those, sorry?
That marks a difference in how I thought about things and about what it was to be female.
Right. So you do think that we do have more responsibility in that way, not just as a reaction to like how the men were speaking about it?
I think we have to be careful and
right.
in some instances cautious and prepared. But when, as I said, when I was younger, I was very defiant and very naive in a way.
But I mean, I'd argue that most of us are. We have had to learn how to do that. Like, I can't think of any woman that I know that would put on a miniskirt and waltz into a motorcycle bar on their own.
But women do
at midnight. Okay, but that still doesn't mean that it's okay for them to be raped or that they have any responsibility in it, right? But yeah, I don't know. I do understand what you're saying in terms of pushing back with the with the idea of like what men are telling us to do. And obviously that's such a big topic in a lot of your books, of us owning our own, not only agency as well as sexuality, but also our mistakes, right? Which I think is another big thing that we still I mean, I deal in film, and that's a problem I come up with all the time, that like I had in a new script that I'm working on, a woman cheating on her soon-to-be husband. And, the producers were just like, it just makes her too unlikable. I'm like, well, fine. Like, this is who she is. This is what she's doing. Like, let's get into that. But I'm not gonna, it's just so boring and bland if we all go. It's also a denial of who we are as people. Like, of course we fuck up. Of course we make mistakes. I know I'm saying this to you who have spent your whole life writing about women who, now they're being called complicated women. I'm like, they're not complicated. They're just women. they're humans. This is what happens, that we're not all saints. Anyway, how are we doing on time? I don't know. I've lost all track of.
Sure. So I actually think now is just about we're at 7:46. Perfect time to get started on questions. So anyone in the audience, if you do have questions, you can drop them into the chat box here, and I'll pick them up and read them for you. I'm going to go ahead though and use my privilege as host to ask the first question, which is, this is really for either of you. We touched about it or on it a little bit earlier in the night, but I'm really curious about the idea of beauty as a tool, or beauty as power, and how it can be weaponized by the holder of the beauty and also weaponized against the holder of beauty, and how, while a person like Susanna, like in your memoir, extraordinarily beautiful, but it also made people underestimate you. How did you overcome that? And how do you, I guess, make sure that like people aren't using it against you as you build your career?
Eva, you want to go first?
No, I think this one's for you.
I don't, I was very intent on not thinking too much about what I looked like. I was very wary of that. I think I didn't take advantage of it. I suppose if I had wanted to be an actress, or if I wanted to marry a millionaire, or if I wanted a different kind of career, I might have, but it never occurred to me. And as I say somewhere in the book, it was almost that I was too lazy to as well as fearful of it. A photographer once said to me, you had no idea, did you? And I said, no idea of what? He said, you had no idea what you looked like. And I said, no, I don't think I really did. And he said, well, what would you have done differently had you known? And I said, somewhat to my surprise, I would have held myself more dear.
Mm.
I would have seen it as an asset that was a good thing. After that, I don't know quite what I would have done with it. So in some ways, I was very wary of it, Teresa. Very, very not in denial, as people now say, but I tried not to think about it too much. And maybe I didn't want to be. Although that seems inconceivable, because it was very nice to be pretty. And also I wouldn't have been in the movie. I wouldn't have been there had I not been. I wouldn't have had that work. There wouldn't be that cover of the book. So I also recognized that that it gave me employment.
Was there ever a moment where you became comfortable with your physical beauty or looks somewhere in your life?
I think it took a long, long, long time. Maybe just about now. Took that long.
Yay.
Sadly, we don't have any questions. I don't know if people are feeling a little shy, but please do ask your questions in the chat box. Otherwise, you're just going to hear me talking for the rest of the night.
Because we've kept it so light and refreshing. I did want to say that despite, it's just I haven't talked to Susanna in a long time, and we usually get pretty deep quickly. But I do think the movie, I see it as a movie. That's why I've told Susanna that as well. But it is very funny. And I'm not amazed because I know you have a great sense of humor, but I feel that, like, considering, the amount of just struggle that you go through in the book, that you're able to keep a sense of humor. As you know, I really respect that and like that. Like, I laughed so much at your whole first night arriving in LA and having to spend it in a closet. Again, I won't spoil the whole thing, or even the filming of the Dean Martin movie, The Slay Girls. I mean, really fun and wonderful stuff. And I did wonder, did you have a sense of humor about it back then?
It turns out that the first night in Beverly Wilshire is another metaphor, of course. But I think that writers, I know you have it, directors, I don't know if painters have it, but the ability to sort of stand aside and to watch yourself. Mm-hmm. It's not a split personality so much as the ability to see what is happening and to see the humor.
Yeah.
So yes, I did recognize a lot of the time that, well, as I said, Warren asking me to pull up my skirt. I did a lot of times see the humor in something as it was happening, and which I think is why I remembered so much.
Right. But did you also feel like maybe the humor, see, I don't find that moment funny, and that might be like a generational difference, because probably by the time I came to that kind of stuff, and again, I really, there's a lot of stuff about Warren Beatty that I think is great as an artist. That aspect of him, and the way that it's talked about, the womanizing, the shampoo of it all. I actually find it really boring, and it makes me think less of him as a human being. So for him to hear, partly also because I love you and I admire you, that to be like, how dare he, if he had done that and at least asked you for, your opinion on certain things, that would have been one thing. And I know you say he cared about, I guess, your notes on script development, which, by the way, was also a job I did for many years. But he only saw women at that time in one particular way. So for me, that's not funny, but I wonder if you had to see it that way as a way of also being able to get on with it, because otherwise.
Well, I think he meant it to be funny, as I said before. And yes, it never occurred to me to say, what are you talking about? And
of course, yeah.
Storm out. And not because I was afraid, because I wanted the job. That wouldn't, if I had been offended by something, that would not have stopped me. There's another instance in the book that I thought about a lot afterwards, which in a way seemed to me more serious, and also funny because of what she said, which was when the brilliant, adorable Susie Terrell complained that she had to go and give John Huston a blowjob every day, and she had lumps in her head because his oxygen tank would bang against her.
Yeah.
Now that makes you laugh. So
yeah.
It never occurred to me at the time to say, what? You're going there why are you doing that? Don't be, how disgusting. I think I thought it was disgusting, but only because he was old and because she didn't have to do it. She had the job, she had the part. She was a wonderful actress. Um,
I think it's the specificity of that that makes me laugh.
what?
Sorry. It's the specificity of it and the grotesqueness of it that makes me laugh. I'm not sure that that it is funny per se. And you know, who knows? We could get into a thing about humor and what makes us laugh and why. As you know, it's is something that I use all the time, both in life and in my work. And I, you know, it's a great tool, I think. The specificity of her having bumps in her head because the oxygen tank is hitting her is like, also it's just something that you haven't heard, right? Whereas the show me your legs thing, sorry, Warren, but we've heard it before, like not that original.
And also it was her way, you know, which I realized at the time too, of getting through it, you know, of making it bearable. If she could make it funny to herself and weird.
Yeah, yeah. I
And
guess
also,
that's what I was saying.
really,
Yeah.
he was very old too, which, you know, made it a little repellent. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know if it would have been better if he had been 30 years old as opposed to 80, but I think Teresa, someone put a note down at the bottom of the screen saying someone named Zoe had a question.
Yeah, so actually, Zoe, I think I can unmute you if you'd like to ask your question right now.
Hi, Susanna. Thank you for sharing so much with us. And I hope this question is not in any way, you know, painful to hear. It's from the book. And I was just wondering for myself, my father was suicidal and I grew up with that dynamic. And I was wondering if at all, like me, you ever felt there was hostility in your mother's suicidal acts or her attempts. I wasn't entirely sure, and I wondered if you could speak as well on how intentional you felt that her suicidal behavior was. But I just wondered if you felt that there was any hostility in her suicidal behavior towards you as a child.
No, I don't think there was. I think there was hostility toward my father. And I think, and this horrible, horrible, all-consuming neediness to escape the position she was in and to win him back, so to speak. I think the suicidal attempts were meant, and I think I knew it then, can't be sure, but were meant to she wanted me to go and tell him. She was using me to get his attention. And it didn't work. And I have often felt guilty about that and wondered how things might have been different if I had gone to my father. I suspect that things would not have changed that much because he was bored and cold and tired of her, you know, her tired of her. So no, I don't think there was hostility toward me. But I think there was hostility, but it was about my father.
Right.
And,
Thank you.
and rage maybe is a better word. I think she was enraged by what he had done to her.
That's interesting because so I think in so much of the literature, especially women of that era, the suicidal act, I guess I'm just thinking of Sylvia Plath, although she's a little later, right? But is seen as this capitulation of you know, the utter defeat and annihilation of the self. But in a way, there is rage in the act. You felt that at the time as a child, or is that upon reflection?
I think it's upon reflection. What I think I did feel as a child is that she wanted me to tell my father, and what has always perplexed me, and I have thought about it quite a bit, and in, you know, analysis, thought about it. Why did I not get him? In the book, I hint at it, and it may have been because I wanted to be the one to save her. You know, that I didn't want to. I wanted to save her. Of course, I couldn't. I can't hear. I can't hear you. Oh, there. No, I couldn't hear you for a minute, Zoe. No, you're silent now.
Yeah, we can't hear you now.
Can you?
Okay.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to remember where my head was. Oh, I wonder if you felt that maybe she wouldn't have been saved by your father, that it would have been fruitless, or if, and you didn't want to know that he wouldn't save her.
I think at that, she wanted his attention, which she had lost, and his care. And as I said, he was by then tired of her. And so he may not have been able to, but it did not stop her from craving, seeking, doing whatever she could to get his attention, getting crazier and crazier and crazier.
Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, Susanna, it's interesting. I was going to ask you about suicide as well, and just in keeping with all the sort of upbeat subject that we're talking about tonight. But then I also, as I was rereading the book this week, I remembered, which funnily enough hadn't stayed with me, that at the end of the book you really say that you no longer thought that she had killed herself, and I was really taken by that again. I mean, I'm glad that you found that peace, because I think, my father also killed himself, although he was not my friend in any way. but obviously, I think any parent committing suicide is such a, it's something that never leaves us, and that we all have so many questions about. Is that something that you came to? Like it sounds to me like even in our past conversations, like you thought she had killed herself, but now you don't think that anymore?
Just looking at it forensically, so to speak, and circumstantially, it just doesn't sound right. She was 35 years old. She had 5 children. It happened, it was very undramatic. My father just woke up in the morning and she was dead in the bed next to him. There were no dramatics, as there had been in the past when she threatened to kill herself. He always did believe that it was physical, that it was a blood clot. As I say in the book, he regretted not having an autopsy done. It may have been accidental. She had been to a party. Maybe she had a lot to drink, I don't know.
And so much was unknown, including...
What?
I said so much was unknown at that time, including also issues of not just mental illness, but even things like, I have so many friends now that have had children and had postpartum depression or anxiety or any of these things that I think about. My grandmother also had 6 children. Her mother had 11 children. It's like, how you deal with any of the issues that we now see as normal after giving birth, all of that stuff that was sort of, I think, just gone unnoticed, and that women were on their own. They're like, good luck to you with your, 5 babies at 35. I mean, she was so young.
Yes, and I think that she would have done it in a different way, because she was so desperate. I just does it sound right to you when I present it that way? It just doesn't.
Yeah, no, it does. And also because I think you do such a good job of talking about something that I also found really affecting, which is her love and probably lust for your father, which I think was probably also a very intense feeling of then betrayal when he went away, right? It's not just a betrayal, it's a refusal of her as a woman, as a mother, as, again, what happens to us when we become mothers, that there is this, even with the best of husbands and fathers, I think a separation of what our duty is once we become mothers versus what, I'm talking about straight couples, obviously, but versus what fathers have to do. And clearly your father continued his, socializing and partying and then obviously going outside of the marriage. So to me, I very much felt that her rage coming from the betrayal of the couple, actually. And in a way I know that often some people threaten suicide as a way of calling attention back onto themselves. And then maybe that's what was available to her, or she thought that would bring him back, and it didn't, but that then ultimately her death might've been accidental. And I wonder how much that, I think that makes a big difference for a child, right? To know that actually she wasn't trying to end her life.
Yeah, I think as a child, it was particularly dangerous for me because I had stopped her, prevented her previously, so that when it did happen and I wasn't there, I, as a child, thought that it was my fault.
Right.
And that was a tremendous weight to carry. It took me years to, I remember once in analysis saying to my doctor, I think I figured it out, what we're trying to do here, which is that what you know as an adult, in other words, I did not kill my mother, or I'm not responsible for my mother's death, is stronger than what I knew as a child. It was my fault my mother died. And because it was a very strict Freudian analysis, I just heard from behind me the voice saying, uh-huh. So
That's what you needed.
I want to I'm going to ask one last question for the evening to maybe give us a lighter note before we say goodbye, which is, even speaking about your loss, you were 17 at that time. And before we started the event, you mentioned that you're teaching freshmen this year. So I'm personally curious they're about the same age you were when you embarked on this great journey of self-discovery and finding your creative self. And I'm curious about, how do you, as a teacher, prepare young creatives for the very, hopefully, long journey that they have ahead of themselves?
It's a great question.
Well, because of the circumstances in which we live now, global warming, racism, Trump, all sorts of things, I concentrate on telling them that it's all up to them without making it sound fearful or overwhelming or frightening. We watch a lot of documentaries. We talk a lot about that the fact that it's in their hands, and this excites them and worries them a little bit, but it also has made them, I can see, curious to know more. So there's a lot of talk about Greta Thunberg, or there's a lot of talk about Black Lives Matter, and they're open to, and even in some instances eager to embrace this responsibility. And that, of course, would have been very different from when I was 17, when it was just, for me, a question of survival. But that gives them a sense of, I think, of not only responsibility, but of their power, what they are capable of doing. So quite different.
Well,
someone left a note, I think, but I don't know how to get it.
Oh, sure. So it was from an Andrea Stein, who was here with us from the beginning, but she just wanted us to know that she had to leave early, but to thank us for the good night, which leads me to say a million thank yous to the both of you, Eva Vives and Susanna Moore. It's been a really magical evening. We covered a lot of complicated topics, but we braved them. I want to thank you for sharing your time with us. Thank you, everyone, wherever you are right now, for sharing your Thursday evening with us as well. Before we say goodbye, I'm just going to mention that I'm dropping the link again to buy a copy of Miss Aluminum with this gorgeous, gorgeous cover. You can buy it online. It's going to be in the chat box, the link. If you want to pick one up at Chevalier's Books, you can just go to our website, chevaliersbooks.com, make a request. And Eva or Susanna, any last words before we say goodnight?
No, it was much too short, actually, in the end. And thank you, Teresa. Thank you for having me back, letting us do this again. Thank you.
Thank you,
pleasure.
Teresa, and thank you, Susanna. This has been, it's an honor for me, and I recommend that everybody read your book if you haven't already, and more soon.
And thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Zoe. Your question was so heartfelt and true.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
All right, everyone. Have a
Good
great night, and we
night.
hope to see you sometime soon. Good night.
Okay, good
Night.
night.